Hello, everybody. Today is a very big day. I am taking the IELTS test.
Hello, everyone. My name is Emma, and I am very excited to talk about the topic of this video. What I'm going to talk about today is my experience taking the IELTS test. That's right. I actually took the IELTS test. So in this video, I'm going to talk about why I took the IELTS test. I'm going to talk about my own experiences using the strategies and tips that I've taught in previous videos. I'm going to talk about what surprised me about the IELTS. I'm going to talk about some of the changes I noticed. And I'm going to talk about what I personally found to be the most difficult part of the test. So let's get started by talking about what is the IELTS, okay? You probably have heard of this test before. The IELTS is an English test. It's one of the most popular English tests in the world. People take the IELTS when they want to immigrate to countries like Canada, England, Australia, New Zealand. So the IELTS is a test people take for immigration purposes. Some people take the IELTS because they want to go to a university, a college, or maybe take some sort of academic program, and you need to take the IELTS to get accepted into the program. Some people take the IELTS just for their job. So for me, I wasn't immigrating. I've finished university, and I guess I took the IELTS sort of for my job. I'm a teacher, and I teach courses on the IELTS. So why did I take the IELTS? Well, I'll tell you in 3 reasons. First of all, I wanted to know, has the IELTS changed? I've been teaching the IELTS for many years, and so I wanted to know, how has it changed? Are there any differences from when I first started teaching the IELTS? I wanted to also test my own strategies. I know this test really well, and I have strategies for doing the listening, the reading, the writing, and the speaking parts of the test. So I wanted to know, do these strategies work, and how well do they work? Which strategies are the best strategies, and which ones are okay, but maybe not as helpful? I also believe that people should live by the advice they give. I give students advice on the IELTS, so I wanted to live my own advice. So it was important to me to put myself in my students' position to see what it is like taking this test, because it's a very stressful test. So I took the IELTS. Let me tell you about what happened before I took the test, what happened during the test, and what happened after the test.
As many of you know, tomorrow I am taking the IELTS. So what I wanted to do tonight, it's the night before the IELTS, so I wanted to tell you what I am doing to prepare and what I am not going to do tonight. So the first thing I am doing to prepare is I'm organizing myself. I have here my little briefcase. In it, I have my identification. You need to bring identification to the IELTS. I have my pencils, my pencil sharpener, my eraser. I also have, in here, I've printed off an example of the timetable, so I know what time the reading part of the IELTS happens, what time the speaking part happens, the listening part, and the writing part. One thing, for example, is there are no breaks in the morning. So the test in the morning is 3 hours without a break. That means before the test, everyone should use the bathroom and prepare themselves. I also reviewed, I don't know if you can see this, but I also reviewed the test format, okay? This is important to know. It's good to know how long you have for each task, because you are responsible for organizing your time on the IELTS. Okay, so you have, for example, 60 minutes to read 3 different passages and to answer questions. but you decide how much time you spend on each passage and on how much time you spend answering questions. So it's important to know the timetable for tomorrow. So I've packed. Another thing I will be doing tonight is I'm going to get a good night's sleep. Fingers crossed. I think that it is very important to get a good night's sleep before any test. So today I have not had a lot of coffee or tea, and I plan to go to sleep early. The last thing I'm doing tonight is I am creating my plan for tomorrow. What do I mean by that? Well, the test is very early in the morning, so I'm making sure I have 3 different alarm clocks ready to go so I don't miss it. I'm checking bus schedules to make sure I can make it on time. I'm getting my breakfast ready so I can eat it immediately in the morning. And I'm also planning on when I leave. The other thing I'm looking for is where are the coffee shops in the area of the test center. For me, I love coffee, especially for a test. I always drink coffee before a test. That's my little ritual. So I'm making sure I know where there is a coffee shop close to the testing center. Here is what I am not going to do. I am not going to cram for the test. Do you remember the word cram? Cram means to study in a short amount of time, but to really study hard. So some people cram the night before the test. This means they study very hard the night before the test. I'm not going to do that. I don't think it's helpful to my brain. I think it's better to relax. I'm not going to pull an all-nighter tonight. Some people stay up all night to study before a test. This is a terrible idea, and it's something I will not do tonight. So there you have it, my plans the night before the IELTS.
Okay, so the thing you need to know about the IELTS is even if you speak English fluently, you really need to know the test. Because there are things on the test that if you're not prepared for, can be quite difficult, even for a native speaker. So the best thing to do is to do practice tests before you take the IELTS. I took practice tests, and this really, really helped me during the actual IELTS test. So first thing I did, many practice tests. I learned the structure of the IELTS. I practiced the listening, the writing, the reading parts, and the speaking, and I found that very helpful. The night before the IELTS, I did not cram. Sometimes when you have a test, you feel like studying late into the night. This is actually a bad idea. Your body and your brain need to sleep before you take a test. The best thing you can do before the IELTS is get a good night's sleep. So, was I nervous the night before? I actually was a little bit nervous. I wanted to get the top score across the writing, the speaking, the listening, and the reading components. Remember, the IELTS tests all levels of English. It tests beginner English all the way up to expert levels of English. So it's not a pass or a fail test. Different people need different scores depending on their goals. Some people might want a score of a 7 for immigration or an 8 for university. It really depends. For me, I wanted to score the top score across all categories. So I was nervous because I was trying for a very high score. And it is a difficult test. So I was nervous. What did I do to help with my nervousness? Well, the night before, I packed all my pencils, my eraser, my sharpener. I figured out where the test center was. I made sure that I was prepared for the actual test day. I also reviewed the structure of the test. So I looked at, okay, what happens first? What happens second? What happens third? What happens fourth? That really helps me when it comes to stress. just knowing what the day is going to look like. I made sure I had any forms I needed prepared. I had my passport packed and ready to go. I set 3 alarm clocks because I am terrified of sleeping in. And I made sure that they were all on AM and not PM. So I really made sure that I was ready to go the next day.
Hello, everybody. Today is a very big day. I am taking the IELTS test. So before I go in to take the test, I just want to let you know how I'm feeling and just talk a little bit about that. So I'm feeling a lot better than yesterday. Some of you I talked to yesterday and I told you I was feeling a little bit nervous. But now that I've had a good night's sleep, I've had a good breakfast, I feel a lot more prepared. Some of you might wonder, did you study last night? Did you cram for the test? The answer is no. I think before a test, the best thing to do is get a good night's sleep. Do I have any regrets on how I've prepared for this test? The answer is yes. I wish I had spent more time preparing. The IELTS is a tricky test. It tests all levels of English, including expert levels. So I do wish I had spent more time preparing this month. So here is my plan for today. For the writing component, I'm going to make sure I create an outline before I start to write. The reason is you get marked on organization, so it's a good idea to know what you are writing and where your writing is going. This can help you make sure you have an introduction, arguments, as well as supporting details for those arguments, and a conclusion. In terms of the reading, one thing I need to do is I need to remember to use my time wisely. You have 60 minutes and 3 different things to read. You have to answer questions for those 3 different passages. So I need to make sure I allocate my time correctly. In terms of the listening, what do I need to remember? To read the instructions carefully. Sometimes there are instructions that say things like, do not write more than 2 words. I need to remember to read the instructions so I don't write too much or too little. Finally, with the speaking, 2 things I'm going to focus on is smiling. When you smile, you feel a little bit less nervous and you tend to have a better connection with the person you're talking to. And I guess that's the main thing, and just focusing on my body language, making sure that I'm breathing okay. I tend to speak very quickly when I'm nervous, so I'm going to make sure that I slow my speech. Not so it's very slow, but just so I sound calm and I have a good rate of speaking. So that is how I am planning to tackle the IELTS today. Wish me luck.
So I woke up early and I went to the exam center very early. It's a really good thing I did because my subway there were problems at the subway. So the trains were very, very late. So if I hadn't have left my house early, it would have been very stressful. So because I went early, this was not a problem for me. So it's very important to go a little bit early. I saw people come into the test, at the very last minute, and they looked so stressed out. So you don't want to be that person. Go early. While I was on the subway, I made my own plan. So I thought about, okay, what is one thing that will help me for the listening component? What's one thing to really think about? For me, that was read the instructions carefully. The listening component often has instructions like, in your answer, use 3 words or less. If you use more than 3 words, you lose marks. So it was really important for me to pay attention to the instructions, because even if I wrote the correct answer, if I didn't follow the instructions, I could still get an incorrect, I could still get an answer wrong. So that's what my plan was for the listening. Read the instructions carefully. For the reading, I thought about it and I thought, okay, I'm going to skim and scan. Those are the two strategies I'm really going to use on this test. I'll talk a little bit about those strategies in a moment. For the writing, my plan was to make an outline. When you start writing, a lot of people feel stressed. They look at the time and they just start immediately writing about the topic. It's a way better idea to take a moment, breathe, and create a plan. Think about what you want to say, plan it out, make an outline, and then start. So I knew that's what I'm going to do for the writing. For the speaking, the number one thing I could think of was I'm going to smile. When you smile, you seem more confident. It helps you with your own nervousness, and it can actually really help your English improve, surprisingly enough. When you're less nervous, your English tends to be a bit better. So these were the 4 things I was planning on doing during the test. So I got to the test early, and I was one of the first people seated in the room, and then I had 45 minutes to wait in the room before the test actually started. There's nothing to do in the room. You are just sitting there waiting for the test. You can't have your phone, you can't have notes, you can't have anything. So you're just sitting there for, 30, 45 minutes. And that can be really, really tough, especially if you are thinking about the test and you're nervous about it, because then you have 45 minutes to make yourself more nervous. So what was really important was learning how to manage my stress before the test. So during those 45 minutes, what did I do? Well, 1, I went over my plan. Okay, how am I going to tackle this test? Number 2, I did some breathing exercises. So I would breathe in through my nose for 4 seconds, hold, and then breathe out for 8 seconds. That always calms me down. I also flexed my muscles. I went through each finger, flexing each finger, flexing my toes, my legs. That also helped reduce stress. So you don't want to be inside the room too early, because then you have to wait a very long time. But you want to be early enough, and you want to have a plan on how you are going to deal with stress when you're just waiting for things to begin. So that is what I did before the test started. Now I'm going to tell you what happened during the test.
Okay, so let me tell you about the IELTS. I have just finished the listening part, the reading part, and the writing part. It was in total about 3 hours. Now I am waiting to do the speaking part. What I found very helpful was using the strategies that I teach. So for the reading, this meant being very careful with the time. For the writing, this meant actually writing an outline in advance. And for the listening component, this meant reading very carefully the instructions and really paying attention to the grammar of the answers, as well as in the instructions, sometimes they say no more than 3 words, only 1 word, so really focusing on that really helped. Out of the 3 tasks I did this morning, I actually found the listening the most difficult personally. And that's because I found writing, listening, and paying attention challenging to do all at once. It's a lot of multitasking, and that is actually probably one of my weaknesses.
So, the test begins. What is the first thing you're going to have to do? You're going to have to do the listening component. This was actually the hardest part of the test for me, and I'm going to explain why in a little bit. But I actually found the listening component of the IELTS a little bit tricky. First of all, they use different accents in the listening. So you might need to listen to somebody with an English accent or somebody with an Australian accent. So even if you are a native speaker of English, you might not be used to listening to other accents. You might hear words that you're a little unfamiliar with because they're not common in your own dialect. So it's really important for anyone taking the IELTS to listen to different accents while they're preparing for the test. So that was one thing I noticed. It was a little challenging to listen to the different accents. Number 2, like I said before, you really need to know and pay attention to the instructions of the listening. It's very easy to lose marks over stupid things like, having too many words in your answer. So you really want to read the instructions carefully. And you really need to look at the test and see what you're listening for as well. This brings me also to my next point. Practice tests are so important because they will help you with the stress that happens during the actual test. Because I had done so many practice tests, there were times where I didn't understand the instructions or hear the instructions properly. I was distracted, I missed something, but because I had done so many practice tests, I could guess what I needed to do, and so I was able to do it. So some of the times I actually was distracted and didn't hear the instructions, but I was still able to do well on the test because I had done so many practice ones before. So that's why practice tests are important. My next point was you need to answer everything. Even if you don't know the answer, guess. Guess based on based on context. Take a guess because you will not lose marks if you guess and you get something incorrect. Okay, so what I mean is you're not docked marks for guessing. So it's okay to guess. I highly recommend guessing. There were actually 3 questions where I missed what they had actually said. So I had to guess 3 times on the IELTS. And I'm really happy I did because I think I made some really good guesses to what the answers were. You need to check your answers for spelling mistakes as well as grammar mistakes. In terms of grammar, maybe something is plural, you might need to add an S. At the end of the test, you have 10 minutes to check over your answers and to write them on a different form. So you have 10 minutes. During that time, make sure that you pay close attention to your spelling and your grammar. My next point, keep going. So I said there were three questions I missed during the IELTS, during the listening part. It goes really fast. And you're actually doing 3 things at once. You're listening, you're writing, and you're reading questions as well. So during the test, somebody started shuffling papers, and I got a little distracted with that. So I missed one of the words they said. And because you only get one chance to listen, if you miss something, you can't go back. That's it. It's very easy when you miss something to think, oh no, I missed that. What was it? And to really focus on it. But because the test keeps going, you don't have time to do that. So if you miss an answer, that's okay. Keep going. And after, take your best guess. That's my recommendation. Like I said, multitasking is a very important component of the listening. You're reading the questions, you're listening to different conversations, and then you are writing down the answers. So that's really tough. You're doing 3 things at once. So I'm actually a person who has hearing loss. So it's actually difficult for me sometimes to listen when people are talking fast or when there's a lot of things going on. So if I were to take the IELTS again, because of my hearing loss, I would ask for an accommodation. If you have some sort of disability, maybe you have a learning disability and you need, more time, maybe you have a visual disability or a hearing disability, check to see if you can have an accommodation. They might be able to put you in a separate room from everyone, so then you have less things distracting you. There might be different things they can do for you. But if I were to do the test again, because of my hearing loss, I would definitely do accommodations. Because when the other people in the test were shuffling their papers, I found that so distracting. It was really hard to keep focused on the actual listening. So for me, the listening was the hardest part, but I think I still did really well. Now let's talk about the reading part of the test.
My favorite part of the test was the reading. I found that to be very clear. No issues there. So I'll let you know how the speaking goes.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the reading part of the IELTS and my experiences with it. Out of all of the parts of the IELTS, I actually felt the most comfortable with the reading component. I thought it went really well, and I think part of the reason why is because of the strategies I used. So, the first strategy I used was skimming. What this means is that you quickly read the whole passage just for the main ideas. So you're not, if there's a word you don't know, that's okay, you move on. You read as quickly as you can just to get the main idea of what the reading is about. So this is the first thing I did with the reading passage. I also looked at the title, looked at the pictures kind of to help me get a sense of what the whole article was about. After that, I went to the questions. I would read a question, I would underline anything that they were asking me to do, and then I would go back to the reading and I would scan for the answer. So scan means you're looking for specific information. You're not reading everything, you're just quickly looking for keywords, and once you find that keyword, you read to see if it has the information in the answer you're looking for. So for example, one of the questions might be where you need to find somebody's name and what they said about something. So I'd look up the guy's name, and then I'd quickly scan to see the name in the passage. And once I found that, I was able to find the information I needed. So skimming and scanning are critical skills for the IELTS. I finished the reading very early, in part because I'm a native speaker of English and I read a lot, but also because I use the skimming and the scanning strategies. I think that's what really made the reading a lot easier to do. One thing about the reading is you have 60 minutes and there are 3 different passages you need to read. So, and questions for each of those passages. You decide how long you spend on each part. It's very important to manage your time carefully because you want to make sure you have time for all 3 passages. So that's about 20 minutes per passage, give or take a couple minutes. So be aware of the time. Make sure you're not spending too much time on any one passage. And if you run out of time, guess. A lot of the questions have letters where you have to write the correct letter, A, B, C, D, that sort of thing. Or you might have to write true, false, not given. If you run out of time, just quickly write T, 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 okay? Or whatever letter seems appropriate. Always guess if you don't know, because you will not lose marks for guessing. Check your answers carefully if you have time. I went through each of my answers to make sure that they were correct, and I'm glad I did because even though I knew the answer, sometimes I accidentally wrote the wrong letter, so I made some corrections. The other thing is, just like with the listening, you really need to read the instructions for the reading carefully. There might be instructions like, use 2 words or less in your answer. If you use more than 2 words, you're going to lose marks. So it's important to really follow the instructions carefully. At the end of the reading, you have about 10 minutes to check your answers and to make sure that you've filled in everything okay. So make sure you do that. Take advantage of that time. Okay, so that's everything about the reading. Now let's talk about the writing part of the IELTS. Okay, so the writing part. The writing part of the IELTS went exactly how I predicted it would go. The question I got, or the 2 questions, you have 2 things you have to write about, were pretty much exactly what I saw in practice tests. My question for the essay question was about education and team sports. So it wasn't really surprising. I've seen really similar questions about education or how to teach children certain skills. So if you do practice tests, I think you will be better prepared to answer the types of questions you will see on the writing part of the IELTS. I told you before that my plan was to create an outline of what I was going to write. I did this and it helped me enormously. I spent maybe 5 minutes thinking about what to write for task 1 and organizing my ideas. And then I also spent, a couple of minutes organizing my thoughts for task 2. I just wrote something like this on a piece of paper. I just wrote, okay, I need an introduction. Here's my first point, my second point, and my third point. Here's my conclusion. Just having this really organize my writing. And you're going to be marked on organization, so it's really important to take some time to think about how you're going to organize your essay. I actually did the second essay first. The reason is so there's 2 essays. The first one is shorter, the second one is longer, and you get more marks on the second one. So to me, it was more important to do well on the second essay, spend more time on it, more focus, and then to go back to the first. I recommend this because I think that a lot of students or a lot of people taking the IELTS, they spend way too much time on task 1 when what they really should be spending most of their time on is task 2. So I recommend just going straight to task 2, writing that essay, and then going back to task 1. You really need to read the essay questions carefully. You're marked on whether you're able to do what they ask. Do you answer their question? And a lot of students, or a lot of people who take the IELTS, they end up writing about something a little bit different. So it's really important to read the question carefully and to think about it. You need to think, okay, what are they asking me to do? How many words do I need to write? And, for task 2, what kind of essay do I need to write? Are they asking me if I agree with something? Are they asking me to write about a problem and the solutions to the problem? Do I need to compare something? Thinking about these things in advance will really help you organize your answers. I found one thing that was really helpful and saved me a lot of time was having words prepared for the essays. And by that, I don't mean memorizing your answer in advance. You can't really do that. But having many words that mean increase, having multiple words that mean decrease, having multiple words that mean more or less. These types of words I needed to use a lot for task 1. So actually having them prepped in advance really helped me. I found also having words to use to compare things and contrast things was really helpful. So for example, I used in contrast. I used the word whereas. Just having these off the top of my head saved me time and made it a lot easier to write. I also had opinion phrases prepared. So one of the ones I really like to use is as far as I'm concerned. I use that in my essay. Why did I use that one? Well, it's a long one. You get many words with just that expression. If you're trying to reach a word count, as far as I'm concerned, gives you a lot of extra words. So just having different ways to express your opinion is really helpful. For task 1, you often have to compare graphs, or you might have to describe a flow chart. You might have to look at some sort of process and describe what you're seeing. One of the things many learners make mistakes with is they explain everything they see. Whereas what you really need to do is you really need to think, what's the most important information in this diagram? What's most important? So when I was making my outline, immediately I thought, okay, what am I looking at? What's the most important things to write about? And I focused on that. So always ask yourself, what information is the most important to write? My 5th point, one of the things that has changed since the last time I took the IELTS is now there is the possibility of doing it on a computer. I did it the old-fashioned way with pen and paper, or pencil and paper. I prefer writing, and I'm a very slow typer. But if you have trouble writing, if your handwriting is illegible or it's really messy, it's hard for people to read, it might be an idea for you to do the IELTS on the computer. So some testing facilities will offer you that choice. Know yourself, know your strengths. If you are better at typing, choose the computer. If you're better at writing with your hand like me, then you might want to do it the old-fashioned way. So that is what I noticed with the writing component of the IELTS. Now I'm going to talk about the speaking part of the IELTS.
So I have finished the speaking part of the IELTS. It went really well. I was the very last person to go, so I can imagine if that happens to you, it might be a little bit stressful because you're just in a room sitting quietly thinking, and that can be hard right before a test. In terms of the content, it was fine. The only thing I think I could have done better is maybe slowed down. When I'm nervous, I tend to speak faster. So I wish I had taken more deep breaths before speaking so I could have controlled my speed. But otherwise, I think it went really well.
So you've done 3 parts of the IELTS now. What's the 4th part? The 4th part is the speaking part. So let me tell you a little bit about the speaking part. I was unlucky. Why was I unlucky? Well, at the beginning of the IELTS, you find out when your speaking interview is. My interview was the last one scheduled during that day. What did this mean? Well, the writing part, the listening, and the reading part finished at noon. I was told my interview was going to be at 5 p.m. So that's a very long time to have to wait and to think about the test. So again, this is why those stress management techniques are so important. Because if you have a long time to wait for the test, you can easily get stressed out. So it's really important to know how to manage your stress. It's also really important to be early. I was told my test was going to be at 5 p.m., but it ended up being at 4:20. So if I had come exactly at 5 p.m., I would have been very late. Even though they said 5, they often give you a time, but you often have your interview a lot earlier. There were many students or many people taking the IELTS who were really late for the test, for the speaking part. So don't be late, be early. Smile. When you smile, you become more confident. This was a part of my plan that I had before taking the test, and I actually smiled during the interview, and it really helped me. One of the first questions I got during the speaking component was, tell me about your neighborhood. And I had to describe where I lived. The reason I'm bringing this up is this is not necessarily going to be the question you get, but you will probably get a tell me about question. Tell me about your family. Tell me about your work. Tell me about your hometown. So the very first questions you often get during the speaking part of the IELTS are about your own life. They're usually quite easy questions, and they usually start with tell me about. Or they might start with let's talk about. Here I have that here. Let's talk about community. This was something else I heard during my speaking test. And then there were a bunch of questions about community. What you need to know is that the examiners are following a script. So the conversation isn't a natural conversation. The examiners say the same thing to everyone. So you can use this to your advantage, because as soon as I heard, let's talk about community, I felt good because I knew that we were following the script, and that, I don't know, it helped me with my nerves. So knowing what to expect can really help you with even the speaking component of the IELTS. So know the script, know the structure. There's 3 parts to the speaking component of the IELTS. In the middle part, you pretty much have to read something, you have 1 minute to write notes about it, and then you have to talk about it for 1 to 2 minutes. So I knew that was going to happen, so I felt comfortable with that. But if you haven't prepared, that can be really stressful. So know the test. Enjoy this part. It's very easy to be very nervous. I think what helped me was thinking, wow, someone's asking my opinions on these different topics. How exciting. Even though deep down, I'd rather not be doing the IELTS, as you probably don't really want to do a test. Pretending that you are excited to talk about your opinions can really help, because you're more likely to be confident in what you're saying, be comfortable, and show that to the examiner. So try to be excited. Think of it as, your perspective can be, I get the chance to share my opinions on these topics with someone. That's exciting. You're marked on multiple things for the speaking, so even if you make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. You're being marked on your pronunciation, you're being marked on, your organization, your vocabulary. There's different things you're being marked on, so you don't have to speak perfect English. During my test, I started getting off track, where I started answering a question, and then my speaking became a bit disorganized. So then I went back and I just said to the examiner, let me rephrase that. This was a really powerful line. The reason is sometimes you end up going the wrong way and you find yourself not answering what you're supposed to answer. So you can always kind of backtrack by using a phrase like, let me rephrase that, or let me start again. That's okay to do. The final thing I wanted to talk about with the speaking component of the IELTS is the importance of just breathing. When I'm nervous, I speak very fast. And sometimes I speak so fast that my voice is going faster than my thoughts. During the IELTS, I had to tell myself, okay, breathe and slow down. It's not a race. You don't have to speak as fast as you can. It's better to speak slowly and clearly. Not too slow. You want to speak at a normal rate, but know yourself. Know what your issues are. For me, it's speaking too fast. So I had to really breathe to make sure I wasn't talking too quickly. So that is what happened to me during the IELTS. I think overall I did really well. Fingers crossed, I got the score I wanted. I find out tomorrow. So we shall see. Regardless of how you do on the IELTS, I want to say congratulations. It is not an easy test, and it takes a lot of time, it takes energy, it takes preparation. Whether you're a beginner or even an expert user of English, this test takes time and preparation if you want to do well. So, congratulations for your effort and your hard work. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed listening to a teacher talk about her experience with the IELTS. It's a unique perspective, I think. For more information about the IELTS test, you can check out my channel. I have a lot of different videos on many different aspects of the IELTS. You can also take our quiz on some of the topics I talked about here at www.engvid.com just to practice what you heard. You can also check out my website at www.teacheremma.com. There you can find more resources on many different topics. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and when you subscribe, ring the bell to make sure that you get all the latest videos that we're creating. Thanks again for watching. Good luck on your test, and until next time, take care.